Welcome back to the Arcade Pac-Man Marathon. Last time we took a look at Pac-Man Plus, an odd enhancement of the original Pac-Man game, and today we're covering Baby Pac-Man. Baby Pac-Man is incredibly unique for its arcade pinball hybrid setup, being half maze-style video game and half physical pinball table. The two elements interact with each other in interesting ways, but how does that work? Is this game a hidden gem lost to time because of its weird concept? Let's find out. Before we get started on the review, we've got a lot to discuss about the development history and modern accessibility, and I'll have to start by correcting a few mistakes from the Miss Pac-Man review. Apparently, the story I've been told about Miss Pac-Man's development was a bit dramatized. In actuality, GCC, the developers of Miss Pac-Man, originally pitched their Crazy Auto conversion kit to Bally Midway, and they went to get approval from Namco for release. At this point, Namco suggested reskinning it to be in line with the Pac-Man universe, and Miss Pac-Man was born. There was actually no bad blood between Bally Midway and Namco. Yet. After the success of Miss Pac-Man, that's when Bally Midway got a little antsy with their sequels. I can't find any solid information about Pac-Man Plus's status in all this mess, but I can tell you at least where the rest of the sequels stand. Baby Pac-Man was the first of these sequels developed in-house at Bally Midway, without the express permission of Namco. Developer Claude Ferdinand wanted to make a video game pinball hybrid, and felt a Pac-Man sequel would be a perfect fit, so his team got to work on Baby Pac-Man. The game released in 1982 and was a commercial flop, only selling about 7,000 units across the US. These are pretty rare machines to come by in the wild, and that brings us to the question, how do you play this game in 2021? There are 3 options for playing Baby Pac-Man today, each with varying degrees of quality and accessibility. The first is on an official cabinet. I'm lucky enough to have a local arcade with a cabinet of this in it, so I'll be showing some footage from that throughout the video, but as I'm sure you've already noticed, it's not the main source of footage I've used for this video. That would be Visual Pinball X with PinMAME, a fork of MAME made to work in tandem with Visual Pinball X that allows for accurate emulation of the arcade game with a digital recreation of the pinball table. This is the most accurate way to emulate the game, and it works really well, but I'll tell you, setting this thing up was a massive pain in the ass. Even now that I've got it working, there will still be times where I boot it up and the video game portion just won't load for some reason. It gets to the boot up sequence and then stops entirely, and all I'm left with is this pinball table by itself. When it does work though, it's an incredibly accurate emulation and the closest you'll get to the real thing without an actual cabinet. Finally, there's the Atari 7800 homebrew port developed by Bob DeCrescenzo in 2019. It's obviously a downgrade from the original game in both graphics and sound, and especially with the digital pinball table, but for what it is, Bob certainly did the best that he could with this port. In fact, it even offers a number of different options to play the game in different ways. You can have the game remember your power pellets, switch the Ghost AI between arcade and classic, and even choose to play only the mazes or only the pinball if you want. These options are a huge help in making the game more accessible, and an Atari 7800 emulator is a hell of a lot easier to set up than PinMAME was. Unfortunately though, my emulator has this weird issue where it'll freeze for a little bit every second or so, and it makes the game damn near unplayable. I don't remember this happening before when I first downloaded it and tested it out, so I have no clue what's going on here. I'll talk more about the Atari 7800 version's different options as they become relevant throughout the review. You may be wondering why I'm not doing version versus this time, and that's for a couple of reasons. For one, it's a fan-made port, and while that doesn't necessarily always mean I won't give a game the version versus treatment, the other main reason is that the differences aren't significant enough to warrant this segment. You see, fan-made ports are usually made with the goal of accuracy, not improvement. Any additional modes or options are typically just a bonus, and while this game does have those, it is just a couple of modes. I'll still mention the differences, but I don't think it would be fair to score the two against each other when the 7800 version wasn't made to be the definitive experience. It was made as a self-made challenge for the developer. However, given that it is the most accessible version of this game in 2021, I do want to bring it up and mention its differences. I will bring up these differences as we go, but for now, let's move on to the actual game. As always, we'll start with the story, so let's see those intermissions. Oh, there are none. Wow, that's pretty disappointing. I mean, the short coffee break cutscenes were a pretty defining feature of the first 3 games, and unlike normal pinball tables, you can't take a short break in between balls, since losing your ball in this game just sends you straight back into the maze portion of the game. It's bad enough that there are no cutscenes, but you can't even take a short break while playing this game either. That's quite a downgrade. I guess if there's anything to mention here, it's this brief tutorial screen that plays before you gain control of Baby Pac-Man. Every single time. Fortunately though, you can actually skip this, as well as the startup jingle, meaning you can jump straight into the action if you want to. There's also the ghosts, and they don't even have names this time. I presume that red is Blinky, pink is Pinky, and blue is Inky, just like before, but the orange ghost, Clyde or Sue, take your pick, has been replaced with a green one. A green ghost wouldn't have an official named appearance until Pac-Land released 2 years later, so I don't know who this guy is even supposed to be. What a weird change. Well, I guess I'll move on to the graphics then. Yeah, this ain't looking so hot. I mean, just look at these sprites. Why are the ghosts' eyes and mouths see-through? Why do the colors all look so desaturated? Even the maze walls look off. They've also changed up the fruits once again, this time having a cherry, strawberry, peach, apple, pear, orange, watermelon, and banana. They've finally managed a consistent fruit theme. At this point, though, it almost feels wrong not to have something wacky like a Galaxian or a pretzel, but I'm just splitting hairs now. This animation of Baby Pac-Man spinning a yo-yo on the title screen looks pretty good, but the in-game sprites just look terrible. And what's with the sprite flickering? This looks like a poorly optimized NES game. Isn't arcade hardware supposed to be better than this? I mean, the first 3 games all looked great, with nice neon colors, simple yet charming sprites, and a clean, polished look. Baby Pac-Man looks like it's running off weaker hardware, despite coming out 2 years after the original Pac-Man. What the hell happened here? At least the animations look alright while you're in pinball mode, but your eyes aren't exactly going to be looking up there when you are, so that's not really saying much. I do appreciate that the screen does give you information about which power pellets are activated, your tunnel speed, and which fruit you have, but it's kind of annoying that you can't see this information anywhere on screen during normal gameplay until it's already relevant. The power pellets are constantly visible when activated, so that's not an issue, but if you weren't paying attention to it during the pinball mode, you're not going to have any idea what your tunnel speed is until you're in one. Not much else to say about the visuals. They're lacking to say the least, and so Baby Pac-Man takes another downgrade from its predecessors. Given the hardware differences, I'd say it's time to bring up the Atari 7800 version. The graphics are honestly pretty faithful to the arcade version, at least in the maze, but slightly worse due to the different hardware. The title screen looks just as good as it did on the arcade, and the sprite flickering is even gone, but the pink ghost has been changed to orange, and the extra lives have been made green. Obviously, going from a real-life pinball table to an 8-bit console is going to come with significant changes, and yeah, the pinball table is pretty bland here. There's no more decorative artwork, and even the text explaining how the table works is gone, not that it was ever very clear to begin with. The pinball table elements themselves have also been 8-bitified, and they at least clearly represent what they're supposed to, so no complaints there. I know this all wouldn't have been able to fit on the Atari 7800, so I don't exactly blame this version for lacking these features, but it is a downgrade worth pointing out if I'm going to be comparing the two. So what about the sound design then? Yeah, it's not very good either. The pinball has some nice sounds to it, but the actual game... Again, it's like a downgraded home console port of what should be a better game. The sound effects are just grating to listen to, and they have a tendency to cut off or loop awkwardly. At the very least, the startup jingle sounds fine, but it's just a slightly worse version of the startup jingle from the first game, which is a trend we'll be seeing a lot in this marathon. The only good thing I've got to say about the sound design, and it's not even new or unique. I guess I'll mention the Atari 7800 version again here, since its sound hardware is fairly different from the arcade version. Remember how I said the arcade game is like a downgraded home console version of what should be a better game? Well, this is the actual downgraded home console version of that. It's not good. The sounds are even more grating, and even the startup jingle sounds bad now. The pinball sounds have taken the biggest hit, with weird electronic beeps and poops substituting in for the satisfying dinging and clacking of the pinball table. I know this was the best that could be done, and I'm not knocking Bob's efforts here. Porting this to an Atari console is no small feat, but when comparing to the arcade version, it's strictly worse. Well, Baby Pac-Man has failed to impress, or even really live up to its predecessors at all in terms of the presentation. Maybe its unique gameplay gimmick can save it. Now, I'm no expert on pinball design, and I'm certainly no pinball wizard, but I'm fairly confident in my knowledge of Pac-Man design. It's not quite as simple as analyzing the maze and then analyzing the pinball, as they're very much intertwined. For example, the first thing you might be thinking when you start the game up is...
where do power pellets?
You see, you have to unlock the power pellets by performing specific actions in the pinball section. To keep things simple though, I'll go over the typical Pac-Man design elements and then explain how they work in tandem with the pinball mode, then analyze that. Let's start with something simple, maze design. As I've done in the previous reviews, I'll show each maze with a color-coded guide to show the difficulty flow of each maze. This game only has 3 mazes, which is a bit of a downgrade from Miss Pac-Man's 4, but if the quality of the maze design is better, that's not really an issue, is it? Here's the base for each maze, and here are the mazes with the colors applied. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest here, the maze design is absolute garbage. At least there's no dead ends, but they're still awful. Honestly, it's not even the maze design that makes these mazes so unplayable, it's the ghost AI. When they're this unpredictable and random, nowhere is safe. Not even the tunnels. The only truly safe spots are these escapes at the bottom where the ghosts are incapable of going, but these take you to the pinball section, and once you're in there, the ghosts will just wander back and forth above them until you either go to the pinball or come back up and die. These ghosts will constantly cut you off from all sides. They're ruthless, and so any nuance in the maze design is rendered completely moot. Even in a game with good AI, the mazes would still be some of the worst in the series. They just don't flow very well, and there are far too many spots to get cut off. They're decently sized, but the layouts aren't great. The real problem with the game is, like I said, the ghost AI. These motherfuckers come out of the ghost cage faster than Pac-Man Plus and have absolutely no pattern to their movement. I swear Blinky's movement is completely random. Sometimes he'll chase you relentlessly, and other times he'll be fucking around on the other side of the maze. The others will chase you down and cut you off from all sides constantly, and considering they can turn around whenever they want, that means that there's absolutely no way to trick them into chasing you into a certain direction and then giving them the slip, because they'll just 180 on your ass and you're dead. That's right, this game breaks the basic rules of Ghost AI that I laid out in my original Pac-Man review. The most basic rules for making competent Pac-Man AI are completely ignored for this game. All three of them. Like I said, the ghosts will suddenly turn around at any time. None of the ghosts have any discernible patterns, so they pretty much all act in the same unpredictable manner, and I don't think this game even has different states that the ghost AI switches between, so can they even be in the same states at the same time if they don't even have any different states to be in? This entire AI system is utterly broken, and it totally invalidates any nuance in the maze design, as I said before. Nowhere is safe. Your only escape from these relentless monsters is to the pinball zone. This is how the game expects you to fight back against its atrocious AI and mazy levels. At least in the original arcade version. The Atari 7800 version comes in clutch with its absolutely game-saving feature, Classic Monster AI. Switch this option to Classic in the settings and the ghosts act like they do in the original Pac-Man. Let me tell you, this makes the game so much more fun to play. No more ghosts randomly turning around on you, actually balanced gameplay. The pinball table is given more value because it feels like an opportunity to score more points, rather than a necessity to save you from the absolutely butchered maze gameplay. This was totally unnecessary for a homebrew 7800 port, but the extra effort Bob put into this port and adding these extra options, especially the Classic Monster AI one, is absolutely appreciated. Kudos to you, Bob. So the story is non-existent, the graphics and music are both well below the standards of the series, and the maze design and Ghost AI are a total crapshoot. Can Baby Pac-Man's unique gameplay gimmick save it from its own shittiness? Well, let's break it down. You might be looking at this table and wondering, what the hell does all this mean? Target spots on letter? Saucer qualifies maze? Evens up Pac-Man columns 1 or 2? What is this nonsense? Maybe it makes more sense to someone more familiar with pinball games, but when I first stepped up to this machine, I was totally lost. That confusion didn't go away after I got the hang of it either. I would play a little pinball, lose my ball, go back to the maze, and suddenly the power pellets would be there where they weren't before, and the tunnels would zip me across faster than lightning. I never really understood what caused what until I looked up a strategy guide for this video. Now that I know how it works, allow me to explain all of this. We'll start at the center and make our way outward, since the table is mostly symmetrical in its design and functions. At the top, you can see 5 drop gates with the center gate being colored blue, and an extra ball sitting in this gate at the top. I have gotten this ball out of its cage up here before, but I don't have footage of it and have absolutely no idea how I managed to do so, nor can I find any information online about how to free it. All I know is that it is possible, somehow. As for the gates themselves, each one correlates with the Pac-Man column below it, lighting up a letter in the sequence when struck. If you light up all 6 letters in one column, the power pellet associated with that column will activate once you return to the maze, with a slight caveat. Power pellets are not required to be eaten to advance to the next maze, and so saving a power pellet will actually keep it activated into the next maze. But on the other hand, if you die, every single power pellet gets deactivated and it is absolutely crushing. The Atari 7800 version comes to the rescue once again by allowing you to remember the power pellets you've activated even if you die by setting this Remember Energizer option to on in the settings. Getting back to the pinball table, the blue drop gate in the center lights up an arrow in the sequence in the center column, granting an increasing score bonus for each arrow you light up until you reach the final arrow, which grants you an extra life for the maze portion of the game. There's a catch to this, however. You see, once you hit the blue drop gate, it stays down until you hit one of the yellow drop gates. This will put the blue drop gate back up for a limited time, dictated by the arrow that's currently lit up. You must hit the blue drop gate again within this time limit to advance the arrow to the next position, and each arrow decreases the timer by 1 second, ending with a mere 3-second timer to hit the center gate in order to get the extra life. This is very difficult, and in my 2 hours of gameplay footage I captured, I only managed to actually get an extra life once. However, hitting a yellow drop gate again will reset the timer, and as long as your pinball stays in play, the arrows never reset. So it's just a matter of getting the shots before you lose your ball. Next is the bumpers. They don't do anything special, just give you points. Everything gives you points, as you'd expect from a pinball table, but what we are looking at here is specifically how they work and how they interact with the maze portion of the game. So for the purposes of this analysis at least, the bumpers don't do anything noteworthy. The areas next to the bumpers, however, are quite useful. Say column 1 has the letters P, A, and C lit up, and column 2 only has P lit up. If you land the ball in the hole to the left of this left side bumper, it'll even up the columns, so both will then have P, A, and C lit up. If columns 1 and 2 have the same number of lights activated, both are advanced by 1 letter. The same can be said about the right side hole, but for columns 3 and 4. These are really hard to hit, but very rewarding if you do manage to land it. Next are the kick-out holes located right above the lanes we just described. When entered, they will simply kick the ball right back out with a small score bonus, but if the blue arrows next to them are lit up, landing in one will take you back to the maze from the escape tunnel corresponding to which side of the table the kick-out hole you landed in is located. The gate for that escape tunnel will also remain open, so you can go back into the pinball mode without losing a life or completing the maze to reset the gates. This will allow you to go around and collect dots, or even use up the power pellets, while still returning back to the pinball table all in the same maze, so long as you don't die before making it back to the escape tunnel. Finally, we have the lanes at the far ends of the table, with a flip gate on the top ends of each. The flip gate doesn't really do anything special, it just grants you points, but getting through the lane itself is very powerful. Both lanes have 6 lettered lights, the left one spelling out fruits and the right one spelling out tunnel. Lighting up all 6 tunnel lights will increase Baby's speed when going through the warp tunnel in the mazes, which can be really helpful if the ghosts are swarming you on one side of the maze. Lighting up all 6 fruits lights advance the fruit that spawns in the center of the maze. You see, the fruit follows similar rules to the original Pac-Man, spawning in the center after a set amount of time, rather than needing a certain amount of Pac dots, and disappearing after about 10 seconds. The major difference is that clearing levels doesn't advance the fruit at all. That can only be done in the pinball table. Additionally, I believe going through these lanes while the red arrow next to it is lit up will advance the center column of arrows. Losing your ball will take you back into the maze portion of the game, shutting the gates to the escape tunnels behind you. Unless you didn't hit anything that scores points before losing your ball, in which case the game just gives you another one. It'll only do this 2 times in a row before sticking you back in the maze though, so you can't just leave it there spitting the ball back out on a loop forever. Now that we know how it works, what do I think of all of this? I'm a bit split, because I think there are some really good ideas here, and if you're really skilled at pinball, you can rack up some serious points and dominate the game. I've had a few games that reached over 200,000 points, but you can easily get into the millions if you're really good at the game. In theory, you could max out your tunnel speed and fruit, farm extra lives, and even farm infinite points from ghosts by immediately activating the power pellets, returning to the maze through the kick-out hole, chomping up as many ghosts as you can while clearing the maze, only saving a few easy dots near the escape tunnels, and then going back to the pinball to refresh the energizers and repeat the process. All on the very first maze. It's pretty broken, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, as it's a very high reward for very skilled and strategic play. I also really like the unique ways in which the different elements of the pinball table interact with each other, as well as the maze game. It's probably standard for pinball machines to act this way, but as someone who isn't very well versed with it, I did find these interactions really interesting, even if I did have to go look up how it all worked on Strategy Wiki just to understand it. So does this successfully counterbalance the awful ghost AI and sloppy maze design? Well, not exactly. It only really works this way if you've mastered the game and are a pinball expert. And even then, there are some slight design issues that can interrupt your streak. My biggest problem is the layout of the drop gates. They're all bundled together right in the center here, so it's pretty much inevitable that if you're trying to get an extra life, or even something as simple as activating the power pellets, you will randomly lose your ball when it falls straight down the center with no chance of reaching it with either flipper. I'm not saying there should be no way to lose ever, I'm saying your losses should be entirely skill-based, not because the layout of the table naturally pushes the ball towards unwinnable positions. There should always be a way to keep your ball in play given that you make the right moves and react fast enough, and Baby Pac-Man's pinball table fails at this basic pinball design principle. Like I said, I'm no pinball design expert, but this seems like common sense even to someone who never plays pinball like myself. It also just feels way too small. I get wanting to keep things simple enough that you can easily keep track of everything, considering this is basically 2 games at once, but it feels like they overcompensated. The small symmetrical layout of the table makes it feel cramped and difficult to react to. If they had just shifted some stuff around slightly to give it less symmetry, and made it a bit taller with some round bumpers or something to give you more points, I think that would have made a huge difference in the flow of the pinball table. But even then, I don't think a better executed pinball table could have ever saved this game from its horribly executed maze gameplay. Baby Pac-Man's biggest failure is misunderstanding the basic design elements of either of its two core gameplay styles. It's an okay pinball game at best, and an absolutely terrible Pac-Man game at worst. The pinball is lacking in its size and flow, frequently screwing you over and putting you in unwinnable situations, and considering that's your only way of defending yourself against the sloppy maze design, horrible ghost AI, and total lack of power pellets over in the maze portion of the game, it borders on unfair. Honestly, this game is just not fun to play, at all. The mere 2 hours I recorded for this review absolutely drained me. It's one of the most frustrating games I've ever played, and that's a damn shame because the concept is so cool. It's not like I wanted to hate this game or anything. In fact, the idea of it is so unique and interesting that I can see why some people do still enjoy the game despite all its flaws, but for me, it's a bad pinball table and a bad Pac-Man game. Combining the two doesn't make it fun, I'm just playing two bad games at the same time. And that's Baby Pac-Man, the absolute worst game in the entire franchise. Maybe I'll change my mind on that later, but as of right now, this one takes the cake for me. Next up is the long-awaited true sequel to Pac-Man, straight from Namco themselves, Super Pac-Man. That'll do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like and comment, and subscribe and all that. If you want to support me directly, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description. Thanks for watching!